Chapter 111. Freedom? For example, you can no longer demand that I practice martial arts, nor can you interfere with anything else I do. Li Hao said. Li Tiangang was speechless. Only then did he remember Li Hao's usual habits, his neglect of diligent study, and the waste of his top-notch talent. This was something he could not tolerate, but he had just promised Li Hao, and now he was to go back on his word? A struggle flashed in his eyes, and he thought to himself, with Hao Er's aptitude, even if he temporarily stopped cultivating and continued his past life, it wouldn't have much impact when, in the future, he became a true dragon, inherited the Li family business, felt the weight on his shoulders, and sensed the eager anticipation of countless soldiers entrusting their lives and hopes to him. Perhaps he would wholeheartedly devote himself to cultivation. With these thoughts in mind, Li Tiangang nodded at Li Hao and said with a smile, "All right, I promise you." "Really? Really?" Li Hao couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief, feeling as if a great weight had finally been lifted from his heart. Judging by the severity of his father, he was probably the most old-fashioned in the Li family, stricter than any of the aunts, and difficult to persuade without exposing his strengths. His initial decision not to deliberately show his strength was also partly due to fear that the aunts would push him to cultivate just because they saw his talent. It's like someone who can make millions in minutes, but you see him lying there playing games. How can that be acceptable? Only, his situation was special. He was akin to being able to make millions in minutes through playing games, but he couldn't explain that, and even if he did, they wouldn't understand. "Then he'll go play chess with fifth uncle," Li Hao said. He had been in the Tan Palace for some time, on top of an excursion to Cangyu City for training. It had been a long time since he saw the old man. He must be rather lonely by now. Li Tiangang's eyelid twitched. Left speechless, he could only say, "You may go, but do not disturb the heroic spirits of our ancestors. Don't worry, I have experience," Li Hao said. Li Tiangang nearly choked at his words. Just as Li Hao was about to step away, Li Tiangang quickly said, "Wait, we haven't finished talking about the matter just now. In 2 months, the determination for the true dragon will take place. You need to prepare well for this period. I had your uncle Yushan inquire about it, and your biggest competitor should be the child of your second sister-in-law." As Lu Yurong was mentioned, a cold light flashed in Li Hao's eyes. He looked at his father before him, thought of the poisoned pill, wanted to speak, but then held back. Should he tell his father now? It would surely startle the snake in the grass, and he was not yet sure how his father would handle it. Li Tiangang was not only a lord in general, but also the minister of the Ministry of Punishment, overseeing the Dayu penal administration. So his personal guard was known as the Fatsi camp, and he himself was titled Marquis of Penal Martial Law. But that woman bore the honorable title of a first-class national madam, and the Ministry of Punishment could only temporarily detain her, needing to report to the court with multiple layers of appeals. If they were to arrest her, it would surely alarm her son, frightening him away from returning to compete for the true dragon, shying away to the sanctuary of Mount Wuliang, which would be quite difficult to handle. Moreover, this was a highly probable scenario in Li Hao's view, since his 15 Li realm capabilities had already been exposed, and his talent was not in question. The other side didn't have much chance of competing for the true dragon seat, and retreating to ensure safety might be better. But this was not the outcome he wanted. If the other party holed up on Mount Wuliang, they truly wouldn't know how to deal with him. After all, that person was once a direct disciple of the infinite Buddha Lord. Over the years, Li Hao had made many detailed inquiries about Mount Wuliang. The Great Yu dynasty had 3 top-tier powers. The first was Gontao Palace, the second Mount Wuliang, and the third Hanlin Hall. The first power was undisputed, for it had the strongest person in Dayu, a real being, at its helm. The second Mount Wuliang had the infinite Buddha Lord, second only to the real being. The third Hanlin Hall, though filled with literary men and scholars with no martial strength, had the court behind them, that mysterious, omnipotent Emperor Yu. In this world, literary men don't create phrases that turn into attacking forces. They're just simple clerks of laws and regulations, but these documents are the laws, they are the rules. A decree to confiscate property, even the top sects wouldn't dare to make a peep. Rebel? An immediate military campaign would follow, and not just property confiscation, even the eggs in the house would be shaken until their yolks were broken. Therefore, although the Hanlin Hall had no martial strength, no one dared to provoke it. The power of law was on par with martial force, with martial arts protecting the way of letters, and that's how Dayu remained stable for thousands of years. Otherwise, if martial artists randomly slaughtered civil officials, disregarding the system with brute force and the country was ruled by warriors, it would surely be a disaster, with the people leading miserable lives, destruction forthcoming. Beneath these three top powers were the 5 major divine general mansions considered semi-top tier. Below them were various court departments like the Monster Suppression Department, Emo River Authority, and so on. They were also established by the court. Their martial strength aside, their status prevailed and no one dared to violate them, lest they face an unblockable sweep of the army. After these came the Jiang's top forces like the Sword Pavilion, Qianji Mountain, and others. If the infinite Buddha Lord of Mount Wuliang decided to protect his direct disciple, even with the status of the Divine General Mansion, it would be difficult to shake them. What's more, strictly speaking, Li Yurong's child had not been involved and was innocent, but in Li Hao's eyes, the child had benefited from maternal grace and enjoyed all the advantages, so naturally he should pay back in kind. That year, Li Yurong poisoned him without any real enmity between them. Her main goal was to clear the way for her child. Li Hao's goal was not merely to compete for the true dragon seat, but to make Li Yurong witness with her own eyes her child being cast down into the abyss, with all prospects utterly ruined. Chapter 112. The poisonous pill I swallowed 13 years ago, it was to truly unleash its vicious and cruel toxicity after these 13 years. At this time, Li Tiangang continued to speak. Aside from the second sister-in-law's child, the elder sister and the third sister's children all have a chance to contend, but the third sister's is a daughter, who I've heard has formed a bond in the military and has a marriage arrangement. Therefore, she automatically withdraws from the true dragon seat. As for the 2 children of the eldest sister, they are already in their 30s, have made achievements and established themselves, holding general titles in the military. If they were to compete, they'd be quite formidable contenders, though in terms of innate talent, they're still a notch beneath you and the second sister-in-law's child. Moreover, the eldest sister said early on that she would not let her children participate in the struggle for the true dragon seat, and I still trust her on that. Li Hao nodded. He was aware of these matters as well. Chef Feng, that child, may not have talent comparable to yours, but he has studied under the Buddha Lord, cultivated his character by the Buddha Lord's side, and naturally has the proper disposition. He's said to have reached the 15th realm at the age of 17, which, leaving you out of the question, denotes quite impressive talent. Said Li Tiangang. He himself had reached the 15th realm around the same time, then became a grandmaster at 19, stepping into the 3 immortalities at 23. That was already incredibly exceptional, outpacing the top talents by a wide margin. Of course, that's provided he wasn't compared to his 9th brother. In terms of connections with the Buddha Lord behind him, he won't fall short, and another plus point is his reputation and achievements, Li Tiangang added to Li Hao. I've checked out his situation. He has already descended the mountain but hasn't come back. He must be amassing achievements, which will be a bonus point for him. As for you, who have mostly stayed within the residence without any military achievements to your name, it may slightly weaken your position, but it's not an issue. I'm planning to arrange for you to go to the frontier within the next 2 months to behead a great demon and thus establish some military achievements. Upon hearing about military achievements, Li Hao smiled faintly. Li Fu at his side could not help but also contain his mirth. Li Tiangang, noticing the odd expressions on their faces, frowned and asked, "Why? What is it?" Li Hao did not speak, but Li Fu respectfully replied, "My lord, the young master's military achievements should be considered quite substantial." Li Tiangang and Xian Yu both turned to look at him with puzzled expressions. Li Fu's face broke into a smile as he said, "Does my lord remember how I came to know of the young master's realm? It was in Sangyu City where he single-handedly saved the entire city from the calamity of demons." Hearing these words, Li Tiangang and Xian Yu were stunned and somewhat taken aback. They glanced at Li Hao, saving an entire city? That was a tremendous feat. As veterans of constant warfare, they were all too familiar with the calculation of merits. However, you actually Li Tiangang looked at Li Hao with immense surprise, his eyes revealing excitement and joy, his affection for his son rising significantly. He had thought Li Hao was naturally lackadaisical, merely engaging in amusement, but who would have expected him to achieve such an enterprise so stealthily? Xian Yu too regarded Li Hao with admiration, his eyes reflecting approval. To rescue people from dire straits was indeed to make achievements and establish oneself. The rewards for the young master's merits should be arriving in Qingzhou soon, said Li Fu with a smile, also looking forward to it. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Li Tiangang repeated the word thrice and burst into hearty laughter. With this, the true dragon seat is as good as secured. Li Tiangang was completely reassured. With top-notch talent and such significant merits to his name, even if Li Hao's disposition was somewhat frivolous and not the best, being capable of such an impressive achievement indicated strength in other aspects, which was more than enough. Such a disparity would be difficult to bridge, even if the child of the second sister-in-law were to go and establish military achievements in just 2 short months. Coming across such an opportunity for merits would be unlikely. Building achievements isn't something that just arises, even if one went to the frontier to gain them. The Li family's borders, except for northern Yen, were mostly pacified and free of troubles. Moving to other frontiers would complicate matters. Moreover, earning recognition at the frontier isn't easy. Amidst the tens of thousands, even millions, of demon beast tides, what would the 15 Li realm amount to? The leaders capable of commanding tens of thousands of demons are likely to be at the level of Tianren grandmasters. Li Hao, upon hearing this, said, "If that's the case, does it mean there's nothing left for me to do?" Li Tiangang had just finished laughing when he heard these words. He immediately felt helpless. This child had been left undisciplined for many years and really was too idle. "If you're not cultivating, what do you want to do?" Li Tiangang asked. "Do whatever comes to mind, like painting, playing the zither, or writing poetry," Li Hao answered. Li Tiangang's mouth twitched. None of these things appealed to him. If Li Hao had said this earlier, he would have rejected all of it. But remembering his recent promise to Li Hao, he could only hold back and sigh. "Fine, as you wish, I will keep my word." Good. Relieved to hear him say this, Li Hao was also relieved. The other person might not appreciate these activities. But he wasn't seeking understanding anymore, just permission. He then took his leave, intending to go play chess with 5th Master. Li Tiangang did not stop him, and let Li Hao go. Once Li Hao had left, Li Tiangang turned to Xian Yu and sighed. "I don't know when this child will truly grow up." Li Fu smiled and said, "My lord, actually the young master is already much more intelligent and mature than other children of his age. Him going to find Uncle 5 may not be just for play but for companionship." Li Tiangang was taken aback. His thoughts turning to the lonely old man in the ancestral hall and his solitary chessboard, his expression changed, and he fell silent. Several days later, Li Hao's reward was indeed granted. In light of Li Hao's meritorious defense of the city, protecting over 1 million inhabitants, he was bestowed the title of 3rd-rank Earl. A city was conferred as his fief. Moreover, 10 chests of jewels and gold, a set of divine weapons and armor from the 15 Li realm. Compared to the weapons, armor, and title, these treasures were merely additional rewards. Just like when Li Junyi perished, the rewards included Yu Dragon token and 10 bushels of gold. The gold was just an extra, not worth mentioning. The real reward was the Yu Dragon token. It was a life-saving talisman. 3 Yu Dragon tokens meant 3 pardons from death, which showed the greatness of the merit. After the conferment ceremony was over, Li Hao took the imperial edict and his reward from that top student from the court, bowed, and expressed his gratitude. The news spread throughout the entire residence in an instant, and it also traveled beyond to Qingzhou. The Li family's young master, at just 14 years of age, was conferred the title of Earl, and he had his own fief. Furthermore, Li Hao's meritorious defense was known throughout the city, continuously praised and exalted by the populace, marveling at how he lived up to the Li family name. Some still vaguely remembered the rumors from about 10 years ago, alleging that the Li family's young master was a martial arts cripple. Looking at him now, it was clear those were merely misleading rumors and slander. Li Hao's name was now completely resonating throughout Qingzhou and even spreading to farther places. Inside the residence, the ladies of the various courts were struck dumb upon hearing this news. He Jianlan was somewhat shocked. Ever since Li Tiangang's return, the information that had exploded out about Li Hao was one thing after another, and she was almost overwhelmed. Was this still the child she had been so worried about? He was so dazzling that she could hardly look directly at him. That child, he in the Piaoxua courtyard. Gao Qingqing couldn't quite believe the news. Thinking back on the advice she had given to her own child years ago to keep their distance from Li Hao, she couldn't help but feel regret. Next to her, Li Xianli, having heard the news, was elated, clicking his tongue in admiration. Worthy of being old Seven's child, such a bearing. It really doesn't fall short of old Nine's back in the day. No, at 14, old Nine wasn't as dazzling as he is. Amazing, old Seven truly has a gift for childbirth. Chapter 113. Gao Qingqing's eyebrows shot up when she heard this, and she grabbed a handful of the soft flesh around his waist, gritting her teeth. Li Xuanli, what do you mean by that? Are you saying I can't have children? Li Xuanli was taken aback. immediately realizing his slip of the tongue, and didn't dare to resist with his power, pleading continuously, "Madam, I was wrong, it was a slip of the tongue, a pure slip of the tongue. I think you've just spoken your true thoughts. Madam, how could you say that? I could never get enough of my own children. To me, those three are outstanding, incomparable to anyone." Humph. Within Shueihua courtyard, upon learning the news from the steward, Lu Yurong's face turned pale, and she nearly lost her balance. How could this be? Only 14 years old, and he's being made a count? Even if he did save the entire city's populace, it shouldn't mean skipping directly over the rank of knight and baronet. Just being a baronet is already remarkable enough. So why would he be made a count? Keep in mind, even He Jianlin's children who had joined the military years ago are only counts now, and Li Hao is just 14 this year. Li Yurong clenched her teeth in frustration, cursing the foolish monarch internally, but outwardly she dared not show any question or emotion, venting only within her heart. There are only 2 months left. Even if extended for another 6 months or even a year, where would her son Qian Feng find the kind of merit that amounts to accounts? Achieving merit relies not just on strength, but also on opportunity. Go to the frontier? That's too dangerous. After a while, Li Yurong steadied her mind, thinking that it was a relief that merit was just a bonus, not the deciding factor. Mount Wuliang had already sent back a message telling her not to worry. That Qian Feng had been called back and would be helped to seize the true dragon title. Now, Li Yurong could only place her hopes on the immense powers of the infinite Buddha Lord. Time flew by since the announcement of the Li family true dragon decision. The outside world became greatly agitated. After receiving the summons from his sect, the proud young Li Qianfeng had planned to return to his family to observe the situation, but now had to return to his sect first. Soon after he returned to his sect, he found out that his cousin, Li Hao, had been made a third-class count. This completely shattered his pride, and his expression grew ugly. The merit for slaying the great demon he had achieved earlier also resulted in an award, but it was only a first-class knighthood. Normally, this would have already been extremely impressive, jumping over third-class and second-class knighthood, but compared to Li Hao, there was still a difference of 3 entire ranks, a whole baronetcy. Putting aside his identity as a cousin within the family, he would have to bow and respectfully address Li Hao as Lord Count and bend over in salutation. What a disgrace! Under these blows, faced with his master's help, Li Qianfeng had wanted to refuse to rely on himself, but now he could only acquiesce. He carried the hopes of too many people. By the time Li Qianfeng returned to Mount Wuliang, many forces and gifts had also been delivered to the Kongsindian Hall of Mount Wuliang. Similarly, even more gifts made their way to the mountain and river courtyard. Many groups, sensing that the decision for the Li family true dragon would be between these two young masters, began to position themselves and make early connections. When the previous generation of the Li family was younger and their sharp edges not yet defined, it was not clear who would become the true dragon. And to foster a relationship with the future true dragon of the Li family, one would have to please them all, spreading efforts evenly, but this was too costly to sustain. Now that the target has become clearer, investments can be more focused. And the more one invests, the more likely they are to establish a relationship. In the early years, when Li Qianfeng had just started his apprenticeship at Mount Wuliang, many had begun making strategic gift-giving over a decade ago, facing the rise of Li Hao. It was too late to shift alliances. They could only follow through with their initial path. While the storm brewed on all sides and undercurrents converged, Li Hao, one of the parties at the center of this maelstrom, leisurely rode on horseback to Tan Palace Academy. He first visited Chioma from the water Qilin in the cold pool and drew 2 more paintings for her, also bringing her some crisp pastries. Song Chioma glanced at them and said she didn't like such dry foods. Li Hao, smiling, encouraged her to try them. If you say try, they'll try. Song Chioma, not wanting to spurn Li Hao's kindness, took a taste. After that, she immediately asked Li Hao where she could buy these treats. Seeing her enjoyment, Li Hao honestly admitted that he made them himself. Upon hearing this, Song Chioma looked at Li Hao with envy. Li Hao didn't wait for her to ask and offered that next time he would bring more. At his words, Song Chioma revealed a satisfied smile, and with a graceful gesture, a 7-leaf purple grass flew out from the cold pool. This purple grass was deep violet all over, exuding a shimmering luster, quite lovely to behold. She handed the grass over to Li Hao and said, "This is 1,000-year mysterious dark grass. Absorbing it while refining medicine can ward off the invasion of frostbite and is of great assistance in cultivating frost-related cultivation techniques, even if you do not practice this kind of technique. It will bolster your defenses against attacks from water demons in the future. Li Hao looked at it and shook his head. You should keep this precious medicine for yourself. I don't need it. Why? Song Choma was stunned. She immediately said, I know that the Li family is wealthy, but this 1,000-year mysterious dark grass should also be a scarce treasure for you. Indeed, Li Hao knew this, but his circumstances were special, treasure though it may be. He could not absorb it and it would be of no use to him. Compared to the boosts from his abilities, he didn't lack the effects of such treasures, for just entering a single cultivation technique into ultimate perfection could surpass it. After all, the body has its limits, and once at that limit, no amount of medicine will help. While he could use it for others, the item was precious and it would have been effective for Song Choma, who probably planned to wait for it to age further before using it herself. Keep it for yourself to use, and not lacking anything, Li Hao said with a smile. Song Choma was astonished and stood there in disbelief. To fulfill her promise and protect Tan Palace Academy, she had seen many Tan Palace disciples with ulterior motives attempt to cozy up to her over the years. Seeing Li Hao coming to the cold pool to paint as if he was intentionally getting close to her, she thought it was the same case, but to her surprise, when she offered him a treasure, she was rejected. Besides this treasure, she didn't have much else to offer. Others came to form relationships of convenience, but Li Hao didn't seem to need this. Being the son of the divine general mansion with monstrous talent, why would he go to such lengths to curry favor with a member of the demon race at the Four Stands realm? Do you really not want it? Song Choma hesitated. Li Hao, with no choice, said, if you have plenty of the stuff and insist on giving it to me, I'll take it back and feed it to pigs. You wish? Hearing this, Song Choma rolled her eyes. Feed pigs? What pig would be worthy of it? In his heart, however, Li Hao was thinking it wouldn't be bad to take it back for Li Yuanzhao over at Alpha Academy of Tan Palace Academy. The unsuspecting Li Yuanzhao suddenly sneezed, looking around in bewilderment. Who is cursing me? Could it be that brat, Li Yun? Elsewhere, Li Yun sneezed abruptly and spun around, locking eyes with Li Yuanzhao, instantly connecting. In front of the cold pool, Song Choma gathered the medicinal treasure and placed it back into the pool to be nurtured. It was slightly wounded from being taken out just now, but being a treasure with vibrant life force, it would soon take root again and recover. Next time, bring more of the food you just had. Song Choma winked at Li Hao. Li Hao smiled and waved his hand. Feeding you well is tough, but satisfying a craving should be doable. Saying this, he bid farewell and left. Song Choma watched the young man's receding figure for a long while, a smile gradually curving her lips. Then she turned silently and dove back into the cold pool. As for Li Hao, he made his way to the Black and White Hall. He had previously notified Palace Master Song Yufeng that he wished to teach today. Since he had taken on the role of a nominal instructor, he should fulfill his duties, especially since he was free at the moment. When Li Hao arrived at the Black and White Hall, he suddenly heard a shouting voice coming from inside. Get out. Stand outside the door. Day in and day out, what doggerel are you writing? Are you here to learn martial arts or to study? If it weren't for the sake of your father's face and your father's earnest pleading, with your talent, how could you possibly be admitted to the Black and White Hall? It would be good enough if you could stay in the external Alpha Academy. Li Hao was startled and his expression turned a bit strange. This speech, it seemed quite contrary to expectations. It was as if he was saying, why are you studying books? This is PE class. PE class, do you hear me? Go to the field. Isn't that a bit too refreshing? However, this place is Tan Palace Academy, where literary studies are naturally disregarded. Li Hao stepped inside. The Black and White Hall consisted of two separate halls, the Black Hall and the White Hall. The Black Hall for disciples in the Soul Succession realm and the White Hall for those in the Divine Travel realm. Paul Master Song Yufeng had requested Li Hao to teach in the White Hall, which is what he was now facing, not far from the Black Hall. Hence it was habitually referred to. Collectively, looking around, the interior of the White Hall was extremely spacious, yet there were only 50 seats, neatly organized, neither more nor less. Inside, Li Hao saw a familiar figure, Song Guiyao. She sat in the front, wearing the same White Hall uniform, yet stood out strikingly like a beautiful scene. In front of the students, a young man in his 20s with his head hanging, his face flushed with redness and embarrassment, was receiving a lecture. The one scolding him was an old teacher with white hair, naturally the lecturer of the White Hall. Li Hao was somewhat at a loss. This young man, though in the Divine Travel realm, would be considered a formidable individual in his own right if thrown into the Jianghu outside the academy. Yet here, he was being lectured like a primary school student. If I catch you bringing those useless books to class again, you might as well not come at all. Don't spoil the whole batch with one rotten apple. Get out, stand outside. The elder's temper was extremely volatile as he shouted in anger. The young man's face was beet red as he bit his teeth and walked out, but when he got to the door and saw Li Hao, he paused in his steps at this moment. The other students also noticed the newly arrived Li Hao. It's him. Song Yuya was surprised, then she remembered what her grandfather had said, her eyes lighting up. Was he here to give a lecture? She didn't believe Li Hao could teach anything profound. Although he was advanced in the 15 Li realm and above her in cultivation level, having a high cultivation level didn't mean he could teach others, let alone that Li Hao was only 14 years old. Just a younger brother in her eyes. This person looks familiar. Lin Feifei, Song Yuyao's close friend, said in surprise, feeling she might have seen him before somewhere. Song Yuyu gave a wry smile. She hadn't mentioned to Lin Feifei that Li Hao was the one who had passed through the Mo River that day. It wasn't surprising they didn't recognize him. Who paid attention to what those men looked like on ordinary days? They were just clumps of dirt and trees. Who is this guy? He looks young. Is he new here? The surrounding students whispered among themselves. The young man who had bumped into Li Hao flushed again, not expecting to lose face in front of a newcomer. He was also somewhat surprised. This new fellow looked quite young. He must be some noble family's young master, still standing there for what? Not scrammed to stand outside yet. Angry shouts came from behind, and the young man hurriedly walked out. At that moment, the elderly teacher also noticed Li Hao and immediately recognized him. He had been present when Li Hao was given special permission to enter the Black and White Hall previously. In the past few days, Li Hao's name was all over the city of Qinzhou. A 14-year-old earl, sensational to everyone. Li has arrived. Are you here to exchange? Please come in, said the elder, Sun Hongdian, his fury vanishing and a smile appearing, treating Li Hao with utmost courtesy. This stark contrast in attitude left the students below utterly astonished, their mouths agape. When had they ever seen the old firecracker so submissive? Probably only when the palace master occasionally appeared, right? Yeah, hello, replied Li Hao with a smile, approaching for a handshake out of habit. As they shook hands, his other hand covered the back of the other man's hand and gave it a shake. Chapter 114. Sun Hongdian was somewhat surprised. But he didn't think too much of it, and as soon as he let go, he turned to the students below and said, "Everyone, this is the new titular instructor at the academy, the young master of the Li family, Li Hao." Whoosh! As the name Li Hao was announced, the students who were initially bewildered, puzzled, and curious suddenly erupted into an uproar. In the past few days, the whole city had been talking about the owner of this name. Tea houses, restaurants, and even brothels and inns were the same. To be thrown among the world of heroes, it might only be like casting a small stone, causing ripples that had not yet spread far, but within Qizhou City it was almost a household name, a 14-year-old at the 15 Li realm, a once-in-a-millennium prodigy. Such a living legend was actually right before their eyes? The crowd's eyes widened as they looked at Li Hao as if he were a priceless treasure. Li Hao was somewhat helpless but had anticipated such a reaction, so he could only get used to it. Next, Li will be teaching you. Li's teaching opportunities are only 3 times a year, so listen carefully and cherish this chance. There must be no chaos or clamor. Sun Hongdian said loudly to everyone. The students' eyes shone brightly. This legendary youth was going to teach them? What could he possibly teach? His own cultivation experience. Many faces were full of anticipation. Although they didn't expect Li Hao to really teach them anything, they were curious to see how this youth expressed himself. "Master Li, I leave this to you." Sun Hongdian turned to Li Hao with a smile. Li Hao smiled and nodded. After watching the other man wave goodbye with a smile, he turned his attention to the quieting classroom. "Since you all know about me, I'll spare the self-introduction," Li Hao said with a smile. "What do you want to learn? Swordsmanship, fist techniques, movement techniques? You are going to teach swordsmanship?" Song Yuyao's eyes brightened upon hearing Li Hao's words. As most of them practiced swordsmanship, Li Hao knew that swordsmen and knife users were like language and math, main subjects, broad categories. Most martial artists dedicated their studies to these 2 types. The number of sword and knife manuals passed down from ancient times was also the greatest among all the cultivation techniques. "If you want to learn, I'll teach," Li Hao said with a smile. "Are you going to teach us the swordsmanship of the Listening Rain Tower?" A bold young man asked expectantly. They were all from noble families with good backgrounds. After completing their academy studies, they would either make a name for themselves in Jianghu or return to take over family businesses. With a cultivation level at the divine travel realm, they could suppress many threats, being amongst the more formidable existences within their realm. "Sorry, family secrets are not to be shared," Li Hao said with a smile. "I can teach you whatever swordsmanship you are practicing under Master Bai. How can you teach if you haven't learned it?" Someone said in surprise, feeling that Li Hao's statement was too casual, which immediately altered their impression of him. It's not too late to learn now, Li Hao said with a smile. Does anyone have a manual? Lend it to me for a moment. At these words, everyone was astonished and then some dissatisfaction began to surface. Li Hao's declaration was seen as too arrogant, showing no regard for the lesson at hand. Their initial expectations had suddenly deflated. Song Weiyao frowned slightly, her opinion of Li Hao changing, believing him to be too arrogant. Li, we really want to learn, someone well-meaning reminded him. If that is the case, let's start quickly. Does anyone have a sword manual? Li Hao asked. Seeing that Li Hao continued to act on his own accord, the remaining few became disillusioned. Frowning at his response, was casually pointing out a few things from a sword manual considered teaching? Whether he taught well or not was one thing, but his attitude was appalling. Disappointment was evident in Song Yuyao's eyes. His prodigious talent was real, but so was his arrogance. The students all wore expressions of dissatisfaction. But no one voiced their thoughts. If he wasn't going to teach, then forget it. What was the act for? Was the young master from the divine general mansion that remarkable? Of course, these thoughts remained unspoken, as nobody dared to offend him openly. Nor were they foolish enough to try. Li Hao glanced around, observing their expressions. He instantly knew what they were thinking and felt somewhat helpless. His gaze settled on Song Yueyao. Song, you have the sword manual, don't you? Let me have a look. Song Yueyao, being singled out by Li Hao, looked a bit unnatural, especially under the scrutiny of those around her. She frowned and said, I didn't bring the manual as my practice of that sword technique is nearly at perfection. Then find me a manual. Li Hao instructed. Song Yueyao fell silent with a slight pout, reluctantly preparing to speak to her good sister Lin Feifei, when suddenly a young man said, Li, I have one here with that. He quickly ran up and handed the sword manual to Li Hao, grinning at him. Li, my name is Ma Jing. He wore a somewhat ingratiating expression on his face. Li Hao nodded, as the young man returned to his place. Soft sighs of disdain could be heard from below. Clearly unimpressed by Ma Jing's fawning behavior, Ma Jing, however, did not care regardless of whether Li Hao looked down on them. This was an opportunity to curry favor a fool would miss out. Please give me a moment. Li Hao picked up the sword manual and addressed the crowd. He then began to flip through it. The characters and images on the pages were easily comprehensible with his understanding of swordsmanship halfway through. He could even infer the later moves in his mind. This was a high-quality sword manual titled Yin and Yang Reversal Sword. You have mastered the basics. Would you like to record it? Record it, Li Hao thought to himself soon. A torrent of information flooded his mind, but with his current cultivation level, he could easily assimilate it. After briefly closing his eyes, he had absorbed it all. He glanced at the panel again. Yin and Yang Inversion Sword True State. Yin and Yang Reversal. Yin and Yang Reversal is the essence of the swordsmanship, and with his understanding of the Tao realm, he could grasp the essence of most cultivation techniques, such as the essence of the falling snow sword skill, avalanche. The student standing outside the door, come in and join us, he said before beginning the lesson. Li Hao hadn't forgotten to call in the young man who was being punished by standing at the door. The young man, having heard about Li Hao's identity from Sun Hongdian, had been eavesdropping and secretly watching from the doorway at this moment. Seeing that Li Hao called out to him, he was somewhat surprised, never expecting that Li Hao would remember him, and his heart instantly felt joy and warmth. As for Li Hao teaching swordsmanship, let alone that Li Hao had no intention of teaching seriously, even if he were to do so, the young man had no interest. He had disliked martial arts since he was a child, but being born into a martial family, he had no choice. Thank you. My name is Zhou Zheng, said the young man. Li Hao nodded and said, take your seat. Once Zhou Zheng had returned to his seat, Li Hao then said, I will first demonstrate the falling snow sword skill at perfection level 4. You all to try and perceive what? The already disinterested and even seat-leaving crowd was taken aback by Li Hao's words, and soon someone covered their mouth, stifling their laughter. To demonstrate a sword technique at the perfection level after just one look? This was a high-quality swordsmanship practice, and even if you were a prodigy, you would need to study it for 2 to 3 months to achieve perfection, right? Seeing Li Hao's boast, the crowd already had the look of spectators at a spectacle, ready to enjoy the performance of this legend. Song Yueyao furrowed her brows. Li Hao didn't strike her as the type to be exaggerating, but today's encounter had left her deeply disappointed. However, she thought about their previous interaction in Songyu City, realizing they hadn't really spent much time together. It was just a brief meeting. With a silent sigh, Song Yueyao turned her gaze away. No longer wishing to watch, finding it boring, on the stage, after Li Hao finished speaking, he nonchalantly summoned a sword from the weapon rack. The use of his power to command objects made some of the mockingly looking individuals rein in their scorn a bit, their eyes displaying a sense of gravity. No matter what the temperament of this young master of the Li family was like, at least his cultivation level was truly terrifying, and Li Hao, gripping the sword hilt, still looked nonchalant and easygoing. He sent the sword manual floating back to a student named Ma Jing before he started to wield his sword. The yin and yang inversion sword consisted of moves that were both feigned and real, with feints hidden in solid strikes and solid strikes within the feints, continuously changing in an extremely complex manner. In terms of difficulty alone, it surpassed the falling snow sword skill by a good margin, but at that moment, as Li Hao casually swung his sword, his figure was graceful like jade, his sword momentum like a rainbow. A set of exquisitely daunting yin and yang inversion sword moves unfolded before the eyes of the students in an instant. The laughter froze in the eyes of the students who had been smirking and looking forward to a show. The smug upward curve at the corners of their mouths also disappeared unconsciously as they stared dumbfounded at the intricate and marvelous swordplay. The sudden silence in the hall made Song Weiyao feel a bit of strangeness, and she was taken aback. She turned her head to look toward the front where Li Hao was expected to perform his juggling act, but what she saw was a display of swordplay as splendid as a peacock spreading its feathers. This was the yin and yang inversion sword. Song Weiyao was dumbstruck. It was as if she had been struck by lightning, frozen in place. She had practiced the sword technique close to perfection, but she definitely couldn't perform the marvelous swordplay she was seeing before her eyes. Which was feigned and which was real? Or rather, were they all feints, or all real? She could no longer distinguish the movements. It was as if 10,000 swords were brandishing before her eyes, dazzling her. In the silent hall, after the end of Li Hao's swordsmanship demonstration, it remained quiet for a long time. Li Hao sheathed his sword, looked at the students, and after allowing them some time to digest what they had seen, he finally broke the silence, asking, "Did you all learn it?" As if awakening from a dream, the students then fell into a bout of speechlessness and silence. "Learn it? Just from watching it once, you're asking us if we learned it? We would like to learn it, but we can't remember it. We simply can't remember at all." "That Li, young Master Li, did you really just learn the swordsmanship?" Someone couldn't help but to ask. Hearing this, the crowd suddenly realized the truth and their eyes widened in shock, staring at Li Hao as if they had seen a ghost. "Just flipped through the sword manual once and learned it? And not just the basics, but to a stage of perfection?" Song Weiyao was also stunned, her lips slightly parted and her throat as if blocked. She found herself unable to speak for a moment. Li Hao said helplessly, "Although the Li family has compiled many cultivation techniques and secret manuals, those from Tan Palace Academy are strictly confidential and we are not brazen enough to steal them. Even if I had stolen them, I wouldn't have the cheek to tell you," Li Hao silently added in his heart. Hearing Li Hao's words, the people looked at each other, knowing his statement was indeed true. Each sect has its own peerless techniques and confidential cultivation methods. If someone rashly steals them, it's considered a great taboo, likely to provoke confrontation and disdain from other martial arts sects. Then you, the audience, was somewhat dumbfounded. If it wasn't through stealing, could he really have mastered it on the spot? Just from watching it once? Don't dwell on these details anymore. Try to recall what you can. Once you've absorbed it, I will perform it again, more slowly," Li Hao said. Upon hearing Li Hao's words, everyone immediately snapped to attention and began frantically recalling the sequence they had just witnessed. The hall returned to silence once again. With nothing else to do, Li Hao turned around and brought in the easel that had been left outside the door. Then, he set up the easel in front of everyone and started to paint. As for what to paint, Li Hao had an idea. He decided to include all the students in the hall in his painting. Although they were all at the divine travel realm, not very high in stature, the large group could still provide him with plenty of experience. Seeing Li Hao's peculiar actions, some were puzzled, but no one asked questions, choosing instead to focus on their efforts to remember. After a while, Li Hao completed the painting, estimating that about half an hour had passed. Those who could absorb had likely done so sufficiently, and those who couldn't were probably beginning to forget. He cleared his throat and announced, "I will perform once more. Watch closely this time." At his words, everyone's spirits were lifted and their gazes instantly locked onto Li Hao. Li Hao picked up his sword and began the demonstration again without further ado, but this time his movements were much slower. Chapter 115. Sword shadows were like dreams and illusions, and even after the practice was over, it seemed as if shadows of swords lingered before their eyes like fleeting light, leaving everyone unable to let go and forget. However, the sword shadows were too complicated. Although they were remembered, they seemed unclear. Seeing everyone immersed in contemplation, Li Hao didn't delay any further and sat down to continue drawing. 827, 789. 702 Li Hao ground the ink and painted at a fast pace. The paintings of these dozens of divine travel realm masters each accumulated 700 to 800 experiences, greatly accelerating his painting experience. While Li Hao was painting, the others gradually regained their focus and, upon seeing the busy Li Hao, didn't dare to disturb him but instead seized the time to comprehend and ponder. After Li Hao finished the fourth painting, he looked at the crowd and said, "How does it feel? Li, could you demonstrate to us once more?" The request came from a youth with noble bearing. After the crowd exchanged looks, he was a talent in the White Hall who kept pace with Song Yuliao, now feeling somewhat embarrassed to speak these words after witnessing the demonstration twice. He still hadn't thoroughly grasped it. Li Hao glanced at the others, seeing expectant and reserved looks on their faces. "All right," Li Hao thought for a moment, realizing that repeating the practice like this wasn't the solution. Besides, since he had taken on the role of a teacher, he had to adopt the right attitude and try his best to ensure thorough learning. Otherwise, just going through the motions with the people under him wouldn't be meaningful. He asked everyone once and learned that they all had a foundation of agility. However, the level of agility varied, with some just reaching it and others nearing perfection. "Since I am teaching, I hope you all can achieve something from it." Li Hao looked around the crowd and said, "I have 3 lessons this year, and I hope you can perfect the swordsmanship within these 3 lessons. If you accomplish this, I might consider fulfilling 3 wishes within my power for each of you." Perfect level? 3 wishes? The crowd was astonished and taken aback by Li Hao's ambition. It wasn't about granting them wishes. The young master was making a wish for himself. To teach all of them up to the perfect level in just 3 lessons? This wasn't high hopes, it was sheer fantasy. They didn't dare to compare themselves with Li Hao, who could understand the manual and practice to perfection just by looking once. Moreover, they harbored some doubts in their hearts, suspecting that Li Hao had prepared in advance. Whoever heard of a teacher not preparing lessons? It was simply a bluff. "Li, isn't this requirement a bit too difficult?" Someone spoke up, unable to hold back. "You're not joking, are you, young master?" "I must admit it's a bit amusing," someone else remarked. Song Yuliao looked puzzledly at Li Hao. She had reached the level of agility half a year ago and knew very well how difficult it was to progress from agility to perfection. Even with decent talent, it would take a mad year of intensive practice to make the sword maneuvers second nature and reach perfection. 3 short lessons were an impossible task, but to the legendary young master of the Li family before her, impossible seemed not so distant after all. After all, everything he had shown so far seemed impossible. Seeing the varied discussions among the crowd, Li Hao didn't say much more and once again picked up the sword, merely practicing the swordsmanship at the perfect level, and expecting them to imitate would indeed be difficult and a waste of time, but understanding the essence of the swordsmanship from deep to shallow would be much easier. Silence. Li Hao's gaze turned stern. Just 2 words quieted the murmurs throughout the hall. The crowd was inexplicably shaken, feeling the authority, and their gazes grew solemn. "Feel with your heart," Li Hao spoke, his demeanor no longer casual but rather fixed on the sword. Then he raised his hand and unsheathed the sword. Yin and Yang reversing sword, true form. Indeed, surpassing the flawless zenith, Li Hao directly executed the true form of the swordsmanship. The true form level of swordsmanship, returning to simplicity and transcending the common, could fully reveal the artistic conception and charm of the swordsmanship. The sword light flickered, with black and white gleams alternating, representing the shift between light and shadow. The sword wandered through the air yet seemed to shuttle through another dimension. The sword was real, the space was illusory. As the sword light twisted and turned, the 2 black and white gleams kept alternating until they suddenly merged into one. The sword move was complete. The hall was utterly silent, everyone gazing mesmerized, their gazes and thoughts seemingly carried away by that one sword, immersed and unable to extricate themselves. Even though Li Hao had already put the sword away, they still stared blankly, as if the sword shadow full of indescribable charm was still in front of them, still moving in their minds. Li Hao kept quiet and simply waited. Suddenly, someone snapped out of it. And then one by one, the rest of the people also came back to their senses. "Is this the Yin and Yang reversing sword?" The crowd was shocked, looking at each other in disbelief. "It seems completely different from what I practiced before." "But this seems real. What I practiced before is fake." "It's not fake, it's wrong. This is the real Yin and Yang reversing sword. Mr. Sun taught us the wrong way. No, even the manual is wrong. A sword reverses Yin and Yang, a sword throws chaos into the void." The people became more and more excited as they spoke, their voices growing louder, their faces flushed, unable to control themselves. Song Yuyao was in a daze, filtering out the discussions, and suddenly she closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she rushed to the weapons rack, swiftly drew a sword with a clang. Then she struck out. The sword shadow shimmered like light, quivered like a snake, dazzling like a spectacle. Just like a peacock spreading its feathers, the shadow of the sword perfectly manifested in that moment. Her swordsmanship, which had stagnated for half a year, had reached a new level at that moment. Chapter 116. Everyone noticed and was shocked as they watched her. Song has realized she actually achieved perfection, and she's mastered the sword in less than a year. It's the perfect level, just like what Li just demonstrated. The crowd was extremely shocked, becoming excited. In their remarks, Li Hao's title shifted from Li to Li Master, from reverence to admiration. Meanwhile, several others seemed to have realizations as well, rushing towards the weapon racks, drawing swords, and swinging. The hall was spacious enough for their practice. The others also snapped back to reality, no longer observing others, and hurried to engrave their recent insights using their swords. Suddenly, everyone was rushing to the weapon racks, practicing with swords. After completing her swordsmanship, Song Yuyao also came out of her trance, staring blankly at the sword in her hand, then looked towards the young man. Seeing him give her a gentle smile with an expression of encouragement and admiration, that smile was like a ray of sunshine, striking right at her heart. Song Yuyao was slightly dazed, then her cheeks suddenly turned crimson and she looked away. Inside the hall, everyone was actively and excitedly immersed in their practice, continuously trying to capture and engrave the flavor that was fading from their minds. During this period, several people shouted excitedly, "I've done it." These were the ones who had been stuck at a bottleneck and now suddenly broke through. Li Hao smiled. When someone asked for guidance, he clapped his hands, indicating for everyone to watch again. This was repeated 4 times. By the time the sun set in the west, Li Hao had also ended this lesson. Before class ended, seeing that a dozen people had reached the perfect level, Li Hao was quite gratified, feeling that hard work pays off for those who try. "Li Master, the swordsmanship you demonstrated, what level is it? I heard that beyond perfection is the ultimate perfection. Is that the level you're at?" Just as the class was about to end, someone couldn't help but ask. Li Hao smiled and said, "Beyond perfection is the ultimate perfection, and above that, there is the true state, which is the level I demonstrated to you." He felt there was no need to hide such a skill level. Like sword saints and saber saints, these mighty ones who have immersed themselves in a particular path for decades have already touched the true state. They even have grasped some of the profound meanings of certain sword techniques. Moreover, Li Hao felt that the true state was not the pinnacle. Above it, there should be even higher levels. However, with his current understanding of the Tao realm, he was not able to reach it yet. Perhaps when his state of mind achieves spiritual awakening, stepping even higher, he might catch a glimpse of it. True state. Upon hearing Li Hao's words, everyone was dumbfounded. Song Yuyao's pupils contracted slightly, looking at Li Hao in disbelief. She had heard from her grandfather about the existence of the true state, but it's extremely rare, requiring immense talent in the art and decades of dedicated practice to even touch upon it. Undoubtedly, Li Hao is a genius in sword Dao, but to master the sword technique to the true state, had need at least a decade of hard training, right? But Li Hao is only 14 years old now. Song Yuyao dared not think further, feeling her Taoist heart might collapse. She finally understood what those people who complained about how hard it was to be around a genius truly felt. Tonight, ponder it yourselves. The master leads the entrance. Cultivation is up to the individual. Li Hao waved his hand in farewell, announcing the end of the class. Back at the mansion, Li Fu found Li Hao, mentioning that the Lord had sent a message suggesting that Li Hao make some friends when possible. Although securing the true dragon was almost a certainty, networking was a lifelong matter. He hoped Li Hao could brilliantly secure the true dragon without leaving any shortcomings for others to criticize. Regarding this, Li Hao casually agreed. The next day, Li Hao prepared an extra portion of small pastries and walked to the edge of the cold pond, lightly kicking a small stone into the pond. Soon, the massive figure of the water Qilin surfaced, then transformed into a human form and stepped out of the water, her body clean and unblemished by any water stains. Seeing the small pastries in Li Hao's hands, Song Kumo's eyes gleamed with delight. Li Hao smiled, handed her all the pastries, then waved goodbye without staying for long. Watching Li Hao walk away, Song Choma bit into the sweet pastry in her hand, her eyes curving into crescent moons. Meanwhile, Li Hao was on his way to his second lesson, having already arranged for a transfer. Just as he reached the entrance of the White Hall, he heard an angry voice from inside. "How can you, as a teacher, humiliate a child like this? He may be less talented in martial arts, but that doesn't mean he's a lesser person." You can discipline him, lash him harshly, treat him as strictly as you would treat any martial artist. But you can't disgrace him as if he were a beast. The speaker seemed extremely angry, full of vigor in his voice. Hearing this bellow, Li Hao paused, slowly walking towards the entrance. He saw that the hall was already filled with people. His habit of sleeping in meant he had not arrived early. At that moment, 3 individuals stood in front of the trainees, namely, Sun Hongdian and Zhou Zhang, seen the day before. Next to Zhou Zhang was a strapping middle-aged man dressed in plain clothes but with a rugged and upright bearing. His features bore some resemblance to Zhou Zhang, though Zhou appeared more delicate. On the ground in front of them lay scattered book fragments. Adding another person to the scene, eerily similar to yesterday, General, you can't be unreasonable like this. Sun Hongdian, flushed with embarrassment, was scolding Zhou Zhang, who expected his father to come to visit and caught him in the act. Ideally, just hearing it was enough. He felt that this general should be grateful for his strict education, helping him discipline his troublesome child. Chapter 117. The other party charged in and immediately launched into a furious tirade, leaving him utterly dumbfounded on the spot. I'm unreasonable? In what way have I been unreasonable? Is it reasonable for you to insult my son? Zhou Zhang's father angrily said, although I am a martial artist, I still understand basic principles. I know my son is a person, a dignified and upright person, not a rat that spoils a pot of porridge. Nor is he a decadent, dirty, and despicable worm. He simply hasn't succeeded in martial arts. Not that he isn't fit to be a person. Zhou Zhang's burly father's voice was extremely angry, deafeningly saying, although my son doesn't have high talent, his character is pure and good even if he's only at the power passage realm. He is my pride. What right do you have to insult him like this? Everyone below was silent. No one mocked Zhou Zhang for needing his father's protection. Instead, they showed a hint of envy in their eyes. Sun Hongdian angrily said, I can't reason with you. If this is how it's going to be, then your son should just drop out. If I come across a teacher like you, then so be it. Zhou Zhang's father also shouted angrily as he started to pull his son away. Zhou Zhang's eyes were already red-rimmed. He bit his lip, holding back his tears so that they wouldn't fall in front of so many people, and choked out in a low voice, Dad, I want to stay here. I want to learn properly. I also mastered swordsmanship yesterday. If you want to learn, Dad will find you another master. There are plenty of famous teachers in the world. Zhou Zhang's father snorted angrily. Sun Hongdian trembled with rage, saying, if you walk out now, you'll never be able to come back. I never planned to come back anyway. Zhou Zhang's father was furious, pulling his son to leave, but then they ran into Li Hao at the door. Suddenly, everyone's gaze also fell on Li Hao. All the students stood up abruptly, bowing in unison as they said, Greetings to Teacher Li. This uniform voice not only startled Sun Hongdian and Zhou Zhang's father, but also took Li Hao by surprise. Teacher Li? Sun Hongdian was stunned, looking at Li Hao in confusion. Upon seeing Li Hao, the originally sour eyes of Zhou Zhang instantly lit up, and he quickly said to his father beside him, Dad, he is Li Hao, Teacher Li yesterday, in just one lesson. He made all of us perfect our high-grade swordsmanship from spirit level to flawless. Zhou Zhang's father and Sun Hongdian both wore baffled expressions. What was this child talking about? Li Hao was also dumbfounded and slightly dazed. What in the world? They all learned it in one lesson yesterday. Weren't there only a dozen people who could do it after class? Wait a second. Then why did I even come here today? Li Hao. Zhou Zhang's father looked at Li Hao in shock, then suddenly bent forward, dropping to one knee. Zhou Liang, at your service? Mr. Li Hao. This action left everyone stunned once again. Li Hao quickly helped him up, saying, General Zhou Liang? Young master, I once served under your father, Zhou Liang said respectfully. Li Hao suddenly understood, then smiled and said, There's no need for such formality when you see me. Mr. Sun beside them looked uncomfortable, frowning deeply. Dad, I want to stay here. I want to attend another class with Teacher Li, Zhou Zhang said quickly to his father, Zhou Liang. Having not expected to find the recently famed Li Hao teaching here, thought for a while and then agreed after seeing his son's earnestness. After Zhou Liang gave his son a few words of advice and left, Sun Hongdian scoffed, Zhou Zhang, you disrupted the class. Today, Tan Palace Academy isn't a place where you can just come and go as you please. Zhu Zheng's face changed slightly. Li Hao smiled and said, Mr. Sun, it was all a misunderstanding. Seeing Li Hao intercede, Mr. Sun's expression softened, and with a forced smile he said, Li, you don't know, this Zhou Liang is simply overbearing. Li Hao shook his head to cut him off, smiling and saying, Mr. Sun, I understand you want to use harsh words to motivate the students. But perhaps they're too harsh and might quash the spirit of a young soul, don't you think? Mr. Sun was taken aback, his expression changed, and he said no more. Li Hao didn't say much more to him either, having no interest in associating with such a person. Once the class transfer was done and Mr. Sun had left, Li Hao glanced around at everyone. Just now Zhou Zheng said that all of you have reached the perfect level. The atmosphere in the hall seemed to liven up quite a bit. Excitement flashed across the faces of everyone, their eyes gleaming. Ma Jing jumped in and said, Teacher Li, what Zhou Zheng said is correct. The swordsmanship you demonstrated yesterday is truly an entrance to the path. We caught that hint of the essence of the art, and that's why we improved so quickly in just one day. Even if it was flattery, it had actually hit the mark. Li Hao, resigned, said, I was planning to use 3 lessons to teach you all. It seems I've come in vain today, as there's nothing left to teach. The crowd burst into laughter. As having gained such a huge lesson in one class, they already felt extremely grateful and excited. Someone said teasingly, Teacher Li, have you forgotten something? You said yesterday that once we all mastered it to perfection, you would grant us 3 wishes. Someone looked at Li Hao with excited anticipation. Li Hao, speechless, had made that incentive off the cuff, never expecting they would all be so skilled. They truly deserved to be those who had entered White Hall. Their talents were indeed not bad. Then go ahead and say it, but it must be within what I can reasonably do, Li Hao said. Upon hearing his words, everyone started chattering excitedly among themselves. Some wished to visit Listening Rain Tower, others wanted a renowned sword, and some expressed their desire to learn another swordsmanship technique, and so on. Among these more conventional wishes, there were also some raucous voices in the crowd. Some said they wanted to be sworn brothers with Li Hao, and others wanted a tour of the pleasure district. Li Hao chuckled, gestured for silence, and waited until the crowd quieted down before saying, You all decide together and pick one. Upon hearing Li Hao's words, the crowd reacted with both surprise and delight, not expecting Li Hao to take the offer seriously. Chapter 118. They were already very grateful that I taught them swordsmanship, and most of the requirements they proposed earlier were half-joking. Hey, don't make your demands too outrageous. Lin Feifei immediately stood up to warn them. Feeling that a few of the guys were somewhat ungrateful, chastened by Lin Feifei's words, several people sheepishly started to laugh. Teacher Li, you definitely wouldn't agree to go to Listening Rain Tower, so how about taking us to visit the brothels instead? Someone teased with a playful laugh. Hearing this person's words, the other young men's eyes lit up and they immediately cheered, That's great, that's great. All at the prime age of robust health, they had come to study at Tan Palace Academy in Qizhou and had hardly ever left the mountain. The intense competitive pressure within the academy and the threat of elimination from the bottom ranks made them dare not relax. They had long harbored desires for that place of romantic encounters. Upon hearing this, however, the female students all rolled their eyes, looking disdainfully at these fellows. Li Hao chuckled, Going to a brothel is a trivial matter in this era. Entertainment was scarce, and going to a brothel was akin to swiping through TikTok in a previous life. Brothels come in different grades, and the lowest ones are naturally the whorehouses, cheap and likely to be diseased. Famous brothels mostly sell artistic performances. One can listen to songs and poetry. Of course, if one has good poetry or lots of money, they could also enjoy some pleasurable services if Li Hao were to take them. It would naturally be to the best brothel in Qinzhou to listen to some tunes, and they shouldn't expect anything else. Really? The male students, upon seeing Li Hao agree, were overjoyed beyond measure, but the female students all sneered, their cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Song Yueyu gave Li Hao an annoyed glance and huffed, If you guys want to go, then go. I'm not going. I'm not going either. Lin Feifei immediately declared. All of the female students expressed their protest, but the other male students, afraid that Li Hao might change his mind, were chattering nonstop like animals in the heat of spring. Already set aflame with excitement, it's hard to please everyone. Those of you who don't want to go, I will gift you a drawing as compensation, Li Hao said to the female students. Upon hearing Li Hao's words, the female students were somewhat astonished, and then saw Li Hao take out a scroll from his hand and unroll it. This is what I sketched yesterday. You divide it among yourselves, one for each person. Everyone gasped in surprise when they saw it. They had noticed that Li Hao was drawing the previous day, thinking it was just a pastime, never expecting the sketches to be so exquisite and lifelike. The drawings included every student and Whitehall, with each person's expression pure and clean, some furrowing their brows, others tilting their heads in contemplation, each with their own charm. The girls were depicted as gentle and the boys as handsome and dashing. Each with a distinct aura. Together under the warm sunlight, it seemed as beautiful as a 10-mile spring breeze. Many were captivated by the sight. A young man raised his hand and said, "Teacher Lee, I want go to the brothel. Can I have one of the drawings?" "There aren't many priorities for the female students," Lee Hao said with a smile. The previously unsatisfied female students all pushed forward eagerly, scrambling to get one. Song Yuyao's eyes, as expressive as autumn waters, stared in astonishment at Lee Hao. Such skillful artistry couldn't have been mastered overnight. Seeing that youth as serene as a virgin, dressed in a green robe as stout as a pine, not only was his cultivation level in swordsmanship unmatched, but he also had spare energy to devote to side skills, truly unfathomable. After receiving their pictures, many girls began to appreciate them closely. Even though they practiced martial arts and couldn't afford to delve into other disciplines, they naturally loved beautiful things. Having dealt with the female students, Lee Hao used the time of the second lesson to lead the male students out of Whitehall, heading down the mountain. Seeing that Lee Hao was using teaching time to take them for an outing, everyone was exceptionally excited, something that had never happened before. If other teachers found out, they would probably have all been punished by facing the wall, but with Lee Hao backing them, they were fearless even if the sky fell. As the group descended the mountain, the news also reached Tan Palace. Song Yufeng, who was drinking tea, almost choked, coughing repeatedly and looking up in astonishment. "You're saying that Lee Hao went to teach, but ended up taking all the students down the mountain to visit the brothels?" Chapter 119. News came from another Black Hall elder who had used his divine soul to investigate. Upon hearing the commotion, "Absurd. It's utterly absurd." Song Yufeng was so livid his face turned a shade of iron blue, and suddenly a thought struck him. "What about Yu Yao? She didn't go, did she?" "Grandfather," at that moment, a voice came from outside Tan Palace, and Song Yueyao just happened to walk in. Upon lifting his head to see her, Song Yufeng's heart returned to its place and he breathed a sigh of relief. "What brings you here?" "I was wondering, did Lee Hao take everyone to visit the brothel?" Although mentioning brothel in front of his granddaughter was somewhat indelicate, Song Yufeng couldn't care less at the moment. Song Yuyao's heart also surged with anger upon hearing this, and she coolly responded, "That's correct. This boy, how preposterous." Song Yufeng was seething with rage. Song Yueyao was startled. Seeing her grandfather so angry, she couldn't help but say, "Grandfather, it's really not his fault." "What?" Song Yufeng widened his eyes. Looking at his granddaughter, Song Yueyao felt helpless and could only explain the whole situation. After listening, Song Yufeng's eyes widened even more, and the Black Hall elder beside him was also dumbfounded. You mean to say," Lee Hao glanced through a sword manual and then demonstrated swordsmanship at the level of true form? "Impossible. That's absolutely impossible." Despite his denials, Song Yufeng and the Black Hall elder had to believe it, especially since, according to Song Yueyao, dozens of people in the White Hall had seen it with their own eyes. It was just that such a thing was too exaggerated to believe. Song Yufeng's first thought was that the sword manual had been leaked and Lee Hao had secretly practiced it for a long time before revealing his skills today. But his second thought was, even if the boy had practiced in secret, this was just too outrageous, wasn't it? After all, he was only 14 years old. Did he start training as a baby? With a cultivation level at the 15 Li realm, already breaking the record of the 19 states, but he now also mastered a high-grade swordsmanship at the level of true form? Wait a second. Song Yufeng suddenly felt something wasn't quite right. Lee Hao might not only have mastered one true form level swordsmanship, and it was not necessarily the case that their sword manual was leaked after all. Listening Rain Tower of the Li family had numerous sword techniques, with who knows how many high-grade sword techniques. Even if someone secretly collected the yin and yang divided sword, why would they need to teach it to Lee Hao? The Li family had access to peerless swordsmanship. Since one's energy is limited, they would have trained Lee Hao in the peerless sword techniques, not waste time on a high-grade sword technique. Thinking of this, Song Yufeng's heart gave a violent twitch. And if that was the case, there seemed to be only one explanation. That was, Lee Hao indeed learned it by glancing through a sword manual once. And he even reached the true form. Listening to his granddaughter say, it seemed there was a process, initially showing perfect level, then stepping into true form, skipping the ultimate perfection. Damn it, it's still unacceptable. Even if it was the reincarnation of a sword immortal, it would be no more than this. Song Yufeng's face twitched. Somewhat dazedly looking outside Tan Palace, What kind of child had the Li family brought into this world? It took a long time for Song Yufeng to come back to his senses and, thinking of the affair at the brothel, he couldn't help but chuckle to himself. This young fellow really dares to agree, not even considering his age. Upon hearing this, Song Yuyao's face shifted slightly. Song Yufeng seemed to recall something, smacked his forehead, and in haste said, "They didn't wear the academy's uniform there, did they?" It was too late to stop them now. Moreover, after a single lesson from Li Hao, the effect was so impressive it surpassed what the students had achieved with a year or two of hard training. Letting them take a break didn't seem unreasonable, as long as they didn't disgrace Tan Palace. They didn't, the Black Hall elder stated. Song Yufeng breathed a sigh of relief and laughed. The youngster still has some sense. On his way down the mountain, Li Hao encountered the prince who loved to compose poetry. Jiang Hanqing, learning that Li Hao was going to visit the brothel. Jiang Hanqing was so astonished that he immediately hitched a ride on the opportunity, saying he too wanted to experience it for himself. Li Hao didn't mind and let him follow Cloud Smoke Pavilion, the #1 brothel in Qizhou City. Here, it wasn't just about money for pleasure. It was usually a gathering place for the talented scholars from noble families where they would compose poetry and verses. They often held poetry contests, and one had to come out on top to meet the head courtesan of Cloud Smoke Pavilion, who was none other than the famous Hong Weiner, celebrated throughout Qinzhou. By the time Li Hao and others arrived, a poetry contest was in full swing. One needed silver to enter and poetry to partake in the musical exchange. However, all these disciples from the White Hall were martial artists who had trained in martial arts since childhood. They could recite some famous poets' works, but when it came to composing their own, they were clueless. Luckily, Li Hao was well prepared. Having promised to fulfill their wishes, he naturally wouldn't let them return disappointed. "Come on, one for each of you, memorize these." Li Hao summoned the disciples. Zhu Zhang, who had a fondness for poetry, was astoundingly surprised. He had secretly prepared 2 poems himself, but never expected that this prodigious martial artist would also have poems at the ready. It was known that participating in a poetry contest required original compositions, and borrowing someone else's work would be scorned upon. Jiang Hanqing, having witnessed Li Hao's poetry talent before, also came over, his heart filled with surprise and disappointment upon hearing Li Hao's confident claim, "A poem per person, could they be any good?" But the next moment his eyes bulged in disbelief. Li Hao had no intention of showing off with poetry. Naturally, he wouldn't act like those transmigrated literary copycats, squeezing out poems one by one to impress. He instead simply dished out an entire collection of them. Soon, the whole poetry contest was in uproar as timeless masterpieces from Li Hao's world were recited for the first time in this one. The whole Cloud Smoke Pavilion went from lively to boiling, then from boiling to silent. "Don't you see the water of the yellow river coming from the sky, rushing to the sea and never returning?" Chapter 120. Zhou Zheng softly chanted, stupefied as a wooden chicken, feeling the majestic and grand momentum. "No one to support my aspirations to the clouds. I tread the snowy path to the mountain's peak alone." Jiang Hanxing's eyes sparkled and he clenched his fists tightly as if those lines spoke of the hidden ambitions in his heart. "The sea has no bounds, the heavens serve as shores, scale the utmost heights, and I am the apex." When Ma Jing heard that Li Hao had given him this poem to recite on stage, his eyes reddened with excitement. Though he himself could not compose poetry, he could at least appreciate it. These lines seemed to speak of the extraordinary youth before them. In the world, there are millions of talents, but only the youth before them has reached the pinnacle, standing above the mountain peaks, becoming an even higher summit. "Born a leader among men, only I shall live as long as the heavens alone. I battle across thousands of miles with one sword. I've stood against a million one after another." These arrogant and spirited poems were recited by the disciples of the White Hall, their chanting filled with an electrifying excitement. For martial artists, these vigorous poems struck straight to the heart. "Under the drunken light, I scrutinize the sword. In dreams, I hear the bugle call of camps." Zhou Zheng, born the son of a military officer, stood up, trembling with emotion upon hearing these verses. "Together with the Dapeng bird, I rise with the wind, spiraling upwards to the 9th layer of heaven." This bold and unrestrained poem comforted the hearts of many, igniting the passions of those who had long been frustrated and unfulfilled. One by one, the disciples of White Hall ascended the platform, their poetry commanding the attention of Cloud Smoke Pavilion. Atop the pavilion, a dazzlingly dolled-up girl, just 20, stood entranced by the peerless verses being recited below. Verse after verse, whether bold and forceful or carefree and unrestrained, stirred the emotions of the listeners. In the great Yu dynasty, built on martial valor, The poetic style within these walls largely favored verses of battle and heroism. Lewd and suggestive tunes were scarce, and even if present, were only circulated in commonplaces unworthy of true consideration. Hong Weiner had a keen grasp of poetry, discerning good from bad. She knew few scholars in Hanlon Hall could match the verses heard here, except perhaps a handful of famous poems known throughout the lands. Moreover, Hong Weiner noticed that these young talents ascending the stage to recite poetry all rose from beside a certain youth, who would whisper to each before they took to the platform, actions that sparked much speculation. Time flew by. As the poetry event concluded, the women of the establishment were left with hearts aflutter, and the accomplished guests intoxicated with joy. Someone let slip the truth, and it became known that all the poems were penned by Li Hao, and when someone recognized Li Hao's identity and called him out, Cloud Smoke Pavilion erupted into a buzz. This sensational youth, coupled with his sharp and vigorous verses, made people feel as if the poems had taken on a tangible form. In their excitement, nobody cared that the Tan Palace disciples had shown off Li Hao's work. Rather, they were delighted these individuals had been so favored by Li Hao. Even without their own poems to boast, they received the affections of many women and invitations galore. The manager of the establishment approached Li Hao with a bow, relieved to find the famous young master of the Li family from Qingzhou City to be casual and amiable, and then summoned Hong Weiner to accompany him. The rest of the White Hall disciples were also led away by other girls to enjoy music and art. Additionally, the manager cautiously asked Li Hao if he might lend 2 pieces of poetry to adorn the place. Li Hao, indifferent, allowed him to choose 2. Before long, 2 lines hung outside the doors of Cloud Smoke Pavilion. You must know, in my youth I grasped at clouds, promised to be the finest in the world. The manager regretted that Li Hao hadn't completed the poem, leaving only these 2 lines. At the same time, she could never have foreseen that because of these 2 lines, the Cloud Smoke Pavilion's fame would soon spread throughout the 19 provinces. By then, Li Hao was already in the room of the most sought-after courtesan in Cloud Smoke Pavilion, eating and drinking to his heart's content. Young master, tonight I am all yours, whatever you wish me to do, said Hong Weiner with a playful smile, sizing up the finest young master of Qizhou City. Since Li Hao had revealed his cultivation level, no one among Qingzhou's younger generation could compare to him. Is that so? Then peel some seeds for me, Li Hao replied. Hong Weiner was taken aback, but she came over with a smile and began peeling seeds for Li Hao, delivering them to his mouth. Li Hao clapped his hands, continuing to enjoy himself as he picked up other delicacies. Meanwhile, news reached back to Divine General Mansion. What? Li Tiangang's eyes bulged as he heard his servant's report, and he slammed his palm onto the table, splintering the valuable piece of furniture instantly. That rascal, how dare he? Li Tiangang's face turned red with anger. The former thought resurfaced that his son lacked discipline and would dare anything. Li Fu jumped in fright and said, "My lord, I inquired at the Tan Palace, and apparently the young master, no matter the reason, quick, fetch him back this instant," barked Li Tiangang. He felt that with every passing second, his family's reputation was being tarnished. Heeding the command, Li Fu hurriedly ran off to carry it out. Back in Cloud Smoke Pavilion, Hong Weiner's hands were numb from peeling seeds. By the time she saw off the well-fed and well-drunken Li family scion, she was both angry and upset. Such a great beauty that countless worthy men sought after, and this youth barely gave her a second glance, only having her do menial tasks. Her initial good impression of Li Hao due to his poetry largely vanished. She had thought to use this opportunity to build a good relationship with him, hoping perhaps to marry into Divine General Mansion someday, even as a concubine, for a life of wealth and splendor.